Hey, how's that, McDonald, your real estate agent with Real Property Associates, and today's question that every home buyer should ask is, what if I decide not to buy this house? I've been asked that a few times during a transaction in the middle of it, and that's a kind of a tough conversation to have, just to be honest. That's a question that is helpful to ask ahead of time so you know how the process works. And one thing that I always try to do with clients is educate. That's why I'm doing these videos. That's why I have this YouTube channel. That's why I make these videos, is because I really want you as a potential home buyer to know what's going on. And I want you to know the process. So whenever I get that question in the middle of the transaction, first of all, to me, it's like, whoa, man, I didn't do a good enough job up front educating, or people weren't paying attention at the time and now are scrambling. And that's usually what it comes down to, is when you aren't as familiar with the process, you don't go through it every day. Maybe you learned the answer to that question a long time ago, but now that you're really in it, it's a big question. So let's tackle this now up front, and then I'm always happy to come back. I always do come back and we go into more detail about it. But the gist of this question is, it really depends on where you're at in the process. So you decide, you know what, I don't want to buy this house. Well, if you're not under contract yet, that's easy. You don't have to buy that house. So if you're under contract, there are different levels of commitment that you get to, so that in some of the other videos we've talked about contingencies and earnest money, things like that. Those are going to be conversations that come into this situation. So the first thing you do when you come under contract is you're going to deposit earnest money, and then you're going to have usually an inspection. That earnest money deposit, your good faith deposit, is something that the escrow company holds on to throughout the process, and they keep that money until closing. The biggest contingency that you have on the backside, that's your butt, or like I like to talk about, it's your opportunity to back out of the transaction if there's something wrong with the house, or if you decide not to buy it. So that's going to be your biggest out, your last chance, so to speak, in general. There are other opportunities later on in the process that if things go wrong, there's opportunities to back out, but as a buyer, your last real choice to choose on your own volition to back out and retain earnest money is generally that inspection period. So in the Seattle area, typically that's a 5 to 10 day period where you're able to get an inspection and evaluate the house, but also continue to evaluate, like, is this the house that I want? Do I like this house? Now, I found that most of my clients, more than 90%, are, once they've made an offer on a house, they generally really like it. So it's not a question of, oh man, I shouldn't buy this house. But that inspection might bring up new things. And in that period, if there are things that are just insurmountable, or the seller isn't willing to take care of them, and they're big issues to you, that's an opportunity to back out of the transaction, decide you don't want to purchase the house, and keep your earnest money. The inspection period is also a chance for you to change your mind. It's more like a dinner reservation. So you're saying, I want to buy this house, but I've got this inspection period, and I want to keep stewing on it. And there is an opportunity in that time period to back out and withdraw your offer and retain your earnest money. If you decide at the end, the last minute, that you don't want to buy this house anymore, and you don't have a reason in the contract to back out, the seller, in theory, most of the time would be entitled to that earnest money deposit that you made, that good faith deposit that you as the buyer said, I am committed to purchase this house. I'm showing you proof with my earnest money deposit. So if you do, at the last second, decide to back out, there might be a cost to you as the buyer if the seller says, yeah, this is my earnest money. There's no reason for you to be able to back out. Now, as a buyer, I always want you to know up front the risks of your contract. I want you to know what you're getting yourself into, and that's why we talk about this. When can I back out? Contingencies protect your earnest money. If you're in a competitive market like the Seattle area, generally you're only allowed to have a few contingencies. There aren't as many that you're able to layer on your contract for sellers to take your offer. And so there are clients I've had that have had no contingencies after discussing it, decided to move forward with the purchase, and then we've had this conversation. There's one in particular I remember from a few years ago. No contingencies, and then a couple days later, you know what, I don't know if I want to buy this house anymore. Well, they ended up buying the house. They're glad they did, looking back a few years later. But at the time, it was a big issue. They decided, you know what, we don't want this house. We think we're paying a little too much, and we don't want to deposit our earnest money. And the sellers, of course, got their lawyer involved. We're going to sue you. Those kind of conversations. So this is a really serious thing. Contracts are serious, and they should be taken seriously. So as a buyer, it's good to know what that process looks like. So I'll recap really quick. If you're under contract, you're going to have contingencies that protect your earnest money once you've deposited it. If you are backing out of the contract because of one of those contingencies, that would be an opportunity for you to retain that earnest money. If you decide later on in the process, or you don't have a reason in the contract to back out, it's most likely that the seller would be entitled to your earnest money. So hopefully that's a helpful discussion there on that topic.